Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in The Stream. Today, how are faith communities healing in the aftermath of white nationalist violence?
I'm Malika Bilal. We host an interfaith panel of survivors from 3 of these communities to learn how their congregations are faring after horrific attacks.
"50 Muslims in Christchurch, New Zealand were killed last month when a white supremacist opened fire during congregational prayers at 2 mosques. The incident once again highlighted the threat of white nationalist violence on minority faith communities in the West. Similar attacks also happened at places of worship in Canada's Quebec City in 2017 and in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2018.
But these communities refuse to give in to hate and fear, standing together worldwide and sharing lessons in the aftermath of tragedy. Here now to tell us about how their communities have been doing since these attacks. In Montreal, Razia Hamidi serves as spokeswoman for the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Rabbi Chuck Diamond is the former rabbi of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in Hamilton, New Zealand, Anjum Rahman is the spokeswoman for the Islamic Women's Council of New Zealand. Welcome all of you to the stream.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you very much.
I want to show you something that caught our eye as we were just following what was happening in New Zealand. New Zealand is not in the headlines right now, international headlines, but we got this on Twitter. There was an update from Wasim Al-Sati. He's the father who was shot multiple times along with his daughter in the New Zealand mosque terrorist attack. This sentence here stands out to me. Don't forget us from your prayers. And then Wasim actually does an update. Let's have a listen to part of that update from his hospital bed, no less.
Hi all, Wasim here. Thank you very much, guys, for all the prayers that I have. I'm slightly getting better day by day after the shooting that I have in my body and in my hip and the stomach. I'll get better, guys, soon. And that because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God helped me out, and the support and the strength that I have from you guys.
So Anjum, the world may not be following quite as closely anymore, but there's literal healing still happening in New Zealand, not just in terms of physical healing, but also mental healing. Can you describe what that's like for us?
So the event was still very fresh for us. We had our National Memorial Service on Friday, and I went down to attend that and met with some of the families, and the grief was still very fresh. You can tell that these are families that are devastated. It's a community that's still in shock. There has been so much work to do in the aftermath with the funerals, with the cleaning up of the mosque. We've had so many visitors across the country to mosques around the country. We've just had streams of New Zealanders coming to pay their respects and to show solidarity and support. And that has taken a lot of energy from the community, which means that I feel like we haven't yet had time to process the tragedy. And I think that will still be coming for a lot of those families, and also for the rest of us as a community. As you say, the news is starting to die down and we start getting back to our regular routines. Yeah.
You mentioned the solidarity and the support there, it brings me to this tweet that we got from community members, and several people had this same thought, the same wavelength here. Kahendi says this is a real tragedy. It was the New Zealand terrorist attack, but the management of the whole situation is top-notch by the country and its prime minister. Very commendable, and a template on crisis management. Rabbi, I'm actually going to give this one to you, because when you look at this tragedy and how it was responded to by authorities and by other community members, what did that evoke for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say to Wasim, this Jewish kid from Pittsburgh is with you. My thoughts are with you, and my prayers are with you for what we call a refuah shlema, a complete and full recovery. As far as your question goes, yes, it's a model, and I wish our leadership here in the United States could have set the standard, but I think they fell a little bit short. I was very impressed that the New Zealand Prime Minister came out right away and seemed to say the right things, and they took action on gun control right away, and there's no hemming or hawing, and I stand in awe of that, I have to say.
Let me just show you a little clip of Jacinda Ardern. She's the Prime Minister of New Zealand a day after that attack happened. Have a look.
Because New Zealand is united in its grief, and we are united in our grief. And so I convey that message of love and support on behalf of New Zealand to all of you. This is not New Zealand. The only part of the incident and actions that we have seen over the past 24, 36 hours that is New Zealand is the support that you are seeing now. But nothing that led up to it is who we are or is who this city is.
Razia,
how hard is that?
Yes, yes,
if I can. How hard is it to say that? How hard is it to get up and say that? And
to recognize the humanity.
Yes, and that this is not us, and it's not about us, and that I wish, again, as you see, it sort of touches a sore point with me, that our national leaders could do the same thing. And I think it's very helpful to the healing of the community involved.
Let me just remind our audience that our three guests are in three different parts of the world. Razia, you're in Canada, and of course the Quebec City shooting was horrific, and you remember it very clearly. Leadership in this situation, how does that help with recovery?
It's an essential component of healing, and we saw that in Quebec City. We saw in Canada from our premier and our government at the federal level, Premier Trudeau, in their initial response. I still would agree with Rabbi Chuck that New Zealand really paved the way of what leadership looks like in that crisis, and the gestures and outpouring of just human compassion that really is essential to starting that healing. So we saw that in Canada, we saw that in Quebec. Unfortunately, it wasn't long-lived. Because of the political dynamic that we have here in Quebec. So we made progress on some fronts, but we still have a lot of work to do to start that healing process. I think many of the Muslim community members here in Quebec are still processing that trauma. And I don't think that healing process has been where we'd like it to be because of the Islamophobia and the climate that continuously is very present in Quebec.
When you talk about this idea of processing trauma, you share what you feel you're comfortable sharing. What does that actually mean for those of us who have not been in a tragedy where somebody's come in to our place of worship and murdered our friends?
So I do want to just let the listeners and viewers know that. So I wasn't there in Quebec City, but I was in Montreal, and I did attend the funeral of the three men that were killed immediately. So, but I think the shock was also real for us, and to be so close in proximity to that. And what's really interesting or unfortunate for people who go through that traumatic experience is that there's a part of the brain that just goes off that alerts you and really sets you in panic mode. And I have to be honest, I feel like a lot of us have not been able to get out of that panic mode because very soon after, very Islamophobic and anti-Muslim bills were introduced. So I don't feel like the community really got to have those conversations that would allow us to say that we'll never see this again, or that this is not what Quebec stands for. I think, unfortunately, the rhetoric that we're seeing is really showing us that this is a global problem. Just a couple days ago, the Foreign Minister of Canada was at the UN, and I just want to read her statement. She said that she called for global efforts to combat white supremacy, and I think just seeing what happened in New Zealand, it's quite clear that it was meant to have a global reaction, and I think we need to wake up to that.
Yeah, in New Zealand, I think we took some comfort from the fact that for us, the people that died are martyrs, that they are guaranteed heaven, and dying is always a terrible thing, but they died in an act of worship, in a place of worship. But even so, the actual loss of people is huge. And there were a lot of our community leaders within Christchurch that were part of that event. And so there's also this work around building up the leadership again, building up the leadership team. Obviously, there's a lot of distress and trauma around going back to the mosque that was the scene of such a horrific incidents. So we know that there's a lot of work to do, but the fact that we've had such widespread support, vigils all across the country, my inbox just flooded with messages, and I know that others around the country are the same. It really helps to know that our country is beside us. But of course, as time goes on, those other voices of dissent and negativity start to come up, and that's where I've been saying to our country that we need you there for the long term. We love that you've been here with us straight in the aftermath, and it's so important, but we need you here for the long term to make some significant changes.
I agree. And
sorry, go ahead, Rabbi.
Sorry, Raja. Thank you. Yeah, I'm embarrassed in a way, because when I read it, Quebec, I remember reading something in the paper, but since I've experienced it at home, my reaction to New Zealand is so much different. I feel like I was there in the mosques, and the attack on the mosque was an attack once again on us, on all of us. And we have to be sensitive to it. I have to say the local leadership here in Pittsburgh has been fantastic. And you're right, it's a long-term process. Prayers and thoughts are good in the short term, perhaps. So many politicians send their prayers and thoughts, but it's time for action. What unites us, the three of us sitting here, is that our communities have been the victims of hate crimes. And I think there's more that unites us than divides us. And I really hope that together we can, I hope that we can move into the future and that we can make a difference. And maybe I'll address that a little later, is how we can make a difference.
Well, Rabbi, I actually want to play a comment from someone who is a victim of a similar attack who talks about just that. So let's head right there, because this is a comment we got from Pardeep Singh Kaleka, who is a survivor of the Wisconsin Sikh temple shooting, and his father was one of the victims who died in that attack. Here's what he told the stream.
Sat Sri Akal and greetings. On August 5th, 2012, a white supremacist gunman walked into our place of prayer and took the lives of 6 beautiful souls: Paramjit Kaur, Prakash Singh, Ranjit Singh, Sita Singh, Suveg Singh, and my father, Satwant Singh. On that day and moving forward, we had a choice to make. How do we respond to hate when hate attacks us at our most vulnerable? We chose to respond with love and compassion and stay true to our ideals as Sikhs. Nanak Nam, Chardi Kala, Tere Bane Sarbat Tapala, meaning we shall be relentlessly optimistic for the peace and prosperity of all mankind and usher in a new future where love is the ideal. Sat Sri Akal.
So Razia, he explains there how his community responded to hate, but he mentions white supremacy and the white supremacist who was the gunman behind that. How do you take that on? What is your community and the communities in Quebec doing? What are they doing?
Like I had mentioned, and just for the viewers who are not familiar, so in Quebec right now, there's a bill being proposed to ban religious symbols, and especially targeting Muslim women. So they would be banned from positions of authority like teachers, judges, and police officers. And just yesterday, we had a town hall that saw members from the Jewish community, from the Catholic and Christian community come out, and the Muslim community as well. So my message there, and which I continue to give, is a message of hope. I firmly believe that this is happening for a reason, and that it's up to our generation to finally put a stop to this. In the Muslim tradition, there's a saying by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, how beautiful is the affair of the believer, where everything for him is good. And I truly believe that it's up to us to rise up to this occasion and finally come up with this long-term strategy, set up to see this as an opportunity to set up advocacy centers and build those bridges. And we've been seeing that. It's created a sense of urgency that I haven't seen in this community, and I've been here for the last 10 years. So you have activists, you have lawyers, you have religious congregation and leadership coming together on their own time and just really working around the clock to make sure that that support is there, that our voices are united and loud, and that's been so hopeful. And I do think this is a new wave that we're going to see here in Quebec.
Rabbi, the Tree of Life Synagogue has been so proactive in terms of how do they deal with this situation? What services are available to people? How can we stop this from happening again? Can you take us through that? Because that is absolute action after a tragedy.
Right. Well, there's different. In the short term, I think that the focus has to be on the families of the victims and the survivors, and they have to go through their mourning period. Yes, it's still fresh, but I have to tell you, 5+ months down the road, it's still fresh for us here in Pittsburgh. I like the term relentlessly optimistic. I like that a lot, that we want, hope is the message. And we have what's called Gemilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. And I think that's been a focus here in Pittsburgh to help us, to help all aspects of our community who've come together. The Islamic Center raised hundreds of thousands of dollars here in Pittsburgh for the Tree of Life. Tree of Life congregation has been raising tens of thousands of dollars to help our brothers in New Zealand. So we have to use the community resources that are available, and there are many available. We can't be afraid to go for help if we need help, and we have to be vigilant in our keeping an eye on our friends and neighbors. We have to have their back. And we have to realize, we have to rise above the hatred, and we have to work together to make a better world. Again, it's optimistic, and we have to be relentless in this optimism, because I feel that we can make a difference.
Yeah, that's really important. I think often in our communities, sometimes there's this notion that faith should help us get through it, but sometimes faith isn't enough, and that notion that you said about asking for help and getting specialist support. I mean, these families have been through something extraordinary and extraordinarily traumatic, and so we need to create that environment where it's okay to say, seek spiritual comfort and seek spiritual guidance, but get professional help when you need it. The other thing that I do want to say around this conversation is that it's so important that the full burden of dealing with racism and bigotry isn't put on the communities that are the targets of it. Often we're the least resourced, and the various marginalizations make it that much harder. And yes, we do, and we will reach out as much as we can, but we need the wider community to be stepping up here. And that's something that I have been saying to New Zealand media, is actually racism is your problem to solve, and you need to be stepping up. You need to be putting in the resources. We need to be dealing with some structural issues. Things like algorithms that are designed for profit and not the welfare of people, that are being developed without any democratic process, because they're being developed by what are now these social media companies that are giants that have huge power. We need to start hitting at some of these fundamental and structural things that requires the will, a resolve, and really widespread support throughout the community.
Anjem, you raised so many. Anjem, I just want to get in there because Anjem, you raised so many interesting points there, and one of your earlier points was that people should seek help if they need it, because we had a lot of community members say they rely on their strength to get them through these times, and they know that if they do die in prayer, then that is a blessed death for them, and yet there's fear. There's this tweet from Mahnur, who says, this attack was something that brought the community together, although I think people are quick to forget the long-term impact. I know of parents being afraid to send their children to Friday prayers, and a friend of mine had a panic attack when he went to go pray that Friday, and this is in the Muslim tradition she's speaking of. And so with that in mind, I wanted to direct our attention to another attack. This is a BuzzFeed News headline. California mosque was set on fire and graffitied with Christchurch mosque attack references. We have a video comment from a member of that mosque who talks to us about the heightened sense of fear and tension his community is feeling. Have a listen.
I held a interfaith vigil of interfaith and secular collaboration in honor of the lives lost in New Zealand. 1 week later, that following Sunday, someone tried to burn down one of our mosques here. The brothers came outside and they put out the fire really fast, and they noticed on the ground that there was a hate message, and it was referencing the New Zealand attack. Law enforcement was called. They came in and determined it to be a hate crime and an attempted arson. As you can imagine, the Muslim community here was on edge. They were looking over their shoulder. They were at heightened alert, in which they should be, and which we should be everywhere, given this growing spread of Islamophobia.
So Razia, he went on to tell the stream that authorities have been outside of their mosque and patrolling it, and he really thanks mayors and local officials for giving that increased security for the community. But your take on that, is that necessary? Is that what is going to have to become the norm now?
So it's kind of like what Rabbi Chuck was saying, that there's a long-term strategy and there's a short-term. And so I was going to highlight just the points Anjum made. Some of the immediate responses, actually, I wouldn't say so immediate, but I mean 2 years later, we've seen from the government here in Canada, they just released a budget for this year where they're going to be providing, there's going to be funds and resources for mosques dealing with security. There's also funding that's being put in to research more alt-right groups online. We know that, the trauma didn't begin on January 29th when the Quebec mosque shooting happened, when the New Zealand shooting happened, when the synagogue. These were things that were already happening on a micro level. These were extreme versions of what day-to-day racism and encounters that, many visible minorities are dealing with. So it's really important to research, what are the patterns that we're seeing that lead to these such acts. So it was commendable to see the government's putting funds into that. They're going to be researching and looking into the radicalization of these individuals and what components are feeding into that.
Anjum, we've created our own little community here, our own little community of people who are grieving and recovering at the same time. What do you want to ask either Razia or the rabbi because of your situation in New Zealand? What can they help you with?
I think what would be useful to know is what measures did you take that did bring communities together for that long-term impact, and what changes were you able to make within your communities that really made a positive difference to those communities? Rabbi,
you start.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, I'm not sure long-term, 5 months, I'm not sure is long-term. It's longer term than a month or two. I think that the community has come together and has seen the attack, as I've mentioned, that it's an attack on all of us, regardless of religion, regardless of nationality, regardless of color. And I think it becomes a part of the fabric of the community. So that's what we do. We get up the next day and we move forward. But now our history is a little bit different. And when somebody mentions Pittsburgh, as they'll mention Christchurch, or Quebec City, people will think of these horrific actions. So it's a matter of the community coming together, being there for each other. There have been a number of community of events in support, raising monies, acts of healing for the people who are suffering and will continue to suffer. The politicians in Pittsburgh have initiated outlining guns in the city. I don't know if politically that's going to work or not, but at least it's an action that's saying, we hear you, we want to be there for you, and we want to take some action. And I think you're right, we can't forget about these things. They have to be part of who we are. I hate to see where our sanctuaries are taken away from us. I've talked to people from different religions. There's some who's scared to go into church. They go into church, they're watching the door, they're seeing everybody who comes in, and it's just a sad state of affairs. However, again, I think the final message is we have to be optimistic. Okay. We have to continue to help each other and work together. I'm sorry.
Rabbi Razia and Anjum, we're at the end of this program, but we're not at the end of your journey into recovery. Thank you so much for sharing from your perspectives, from New Zealand, from the US, from Canada, 3 communities, how they are recovering from a mass shooting. We really appreciate your time and also your candor. Thank you so much. We continue our conversation always online at A Day Stream on Twitter. Malika and I will see you next time.